I'll exploit it to my advantage. I added a slide which I hadn't put in originally. I thought, well, if I have an extra 2 minutes, I'm going to do something which other people haven't done and say something about my own Aliyah experience. So I came here 40 years ago, actually more. And I think one of the fantastic things that you've done today, David, is you brought together people. And obviously, the fact that all these people speaking with ex-British or even American accents and so on. But I think one thing which would be true for all of us, and I don't know many of the other people, is to say that we can all talk about these things because our Aliyah experience has been very successful. We may have had some issues over time and problems over the time, but often we tend to focus on, oh, it's so much bureaucracy, so much red tape, and this, that, and the other. And we forget that, 80–90% of the Aliyah experience is a really successful thing. And I'll just give you a brief example. May look a bit egoistic, but it ties in with what I'm going to say about the universities. So I've been here 44 years. I grew up in North London. That's the way they told me to pronounce it. And I'd been on Hachshara and Kibbutz Lavi in the 70s and so on. I suppose I was always fortunate that I come from a family where we were always coming in and out of Israel ever since the establishment of the state. And between my wife and I, we have over 120 ex-British relatives living in Israel. So, I mean, obviously that helps. And I really appreciate very much the people who can't speak Hebrew yet or don't have family here. There are different levels, degrees of difficulty and so on. But the British Aliyah story has been a tremendously successful story. And it may interest you guys to know that although not in absolute numbers, in percentage terms of a community, I think the British Aliyah has the highest Aliyah rate of any Western community. Obviously, there are many more Americans than Brits in Israel, but that's in absolute numbers because the American community is 6 million and the Jewish community is about 250,000. And they're huge success stories and people here. You can see this whole list that you've put together here that can be spoken to. Things have developed in the 40 years I've been here. It's much, I suppose it's a smoother process now than it was 40 years ago. And we've come along and you can see a lovely picture of part of my family at the top. Most of them Israeli born, except for my wife, everybody Israeli born and grown up in this country. And believe it or not, although you may not think that's a picture of Israel, the bottom right picture is a view from the back of my house in the south of Israel in the winter months. And you don't necessarily have to live in Tel Aviv or Jerusalem. There are many places in the periphery of the country as well. And I think it's an important point to make. There's a lot of assistance out there. There's a lot of experience. And I couldn't recommend it more than anyone else. Let me speak very briefly about people who want to come to universities, and I'll divide this into two. And obviously there are people who want to come and study. There are people who want to come and work as academics. I actually completed all my studies in the UK through to my PhD. I'm a Londoner, but I went for 3 years to live in Newcastle, as they taught me to pronounce, where I did a PhD in Durham. And then we came immediately to Israel. I didn't know I was going to work in academia at the time. I came because I knew that I wanted to live in Israel, as did my wife. And we weren't sure whether I'd be able to use my PhD or wouldn't be able to use it. I nearly ended up going into the foreign ministry. And at the last moment, I was invited to see someone at Tel Aviv University, and things developed in a way that I'd never imagined. So don't always imagine that exactly what you plan for yourself is exactly the way it must work out. Things sometimes develop in different ways. I never dreamed that I would end up living in the south of the country at Ben Gurion University, but that's where I've been most of my adult life and career. Israel has a very healthy and strong academic community. Here's a list of the main universities. The first 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 are the well-known universities. The research universities. There's also now an Ariel University in the West Bank. It may be politically contentious, but is considered to be one of the main universities now in Israel. There's also I haven't got it on the list here. There's also the private university the Reichman University in Herzliya, where most things go on in English, but it's also much more expensive. Not every university has every range of studies. So for instance, Ben Gurion University has everything, but it doesn't have a law school. Some universities don't have a medical school. Haifa is really two separate universities, the Technion and Haifa University. So social sciences and humanities are in one place. All the planning and engineering and physics and medical school are in another place. The important thing for anyone considering studying in Israel is to go onto the websites of the universities, find out what they're teaching, and focus on those particular places. As I'll come back to in a minute, there is no clearance system in Israel. In England or in Britain, I don't know if it still exists, but there used to be something called ACA, where you put forward an application to study a specific topic, and if you didn't get into one university, then they'd show you where there are places available in other universities. That doesn't exist in Israel. You have to apply separately to different universities. Go into Wikipedia, you'll see a lot of information about the universities, their international ranking, and obviously every university has its own website. And there are many, many higher education colleges in addition to the universities themselves. Again, this list is simply taken from Wikipedia. As you can see, almost all of them have their own web link to finding out about them. Some are teacher training colleges, some are universities. I suppose in the same way that England used to have polytechnics and universities, many of these colleges are becoming universities. They're beginning to teach higher degrees. Many of them only teach lower degrees, but they're beginning to increasingly to request and to receive authorization for higher degrees. And in many cases, depending on what exactly it is you want to study, in many cases, they may not be worse than the full universities, particularly, let's say, if you're going into engineering or very specific types of study. There are different types of courses. There are overseas students programs, which is something different. People come from abroad and they study in an overseas program. Often it's a year's gap program or something like that. And then that's often people that come for a year, go back, but nevertheless, it's a very good feel for what Israel is like and what the universities are like. There are regular degree studies, there are MA programs, doctoral studies, postdocs. Most undergraduate courses, with the exception of the IDC, that's the Interdisciplinary Center in Herzliya, or what we now know as the Reichman University. Most undergraduate courses are in Hebrew, IDC is in English, and an increasing number of universities teach their master's programs, especially the MSCs, in English, both in order to improve the English of the Israeli students, but also to open it up to an increasing number of international students as such. Tuition costs are relatively low in Israel compared to England. I know in England they're now more or less £9,000 if they haven't put it up again for every university. I know the original idea was that the better universities would charge more and the lesser universities would charge less. My understanding is that everybody charges the top whack. A regular first degree in all Israeli universities is about 13,000 shekels. Today that would be roughly £3,000 a year. Second degree is not that much more, probably another 1,000. Same with higher degrees. It's remained the same for many years. Every so often, governments threaten to put it up, but then the students demonstrate and strike and say, we're not going to vote for you at the next elections. So they also always withdraw from that. Tuition costs are exactly the same, whatever you're studying. So you may be studying a degree in art history or in medicine or in law, but you'll be paying the same amount, whatever it is you're studying. And as David pointed out to me this morning when I showed him briefly this PowerPoint, that if you're making Aliyah and you study within 3 years, the Ministry of Absorption will cover your fees, and any time spent in the army then will be frozen. So you always have a full 3 years to decide on that. There are many different types of grants available, and this ties in actually with the previous talk on volunteering. Israeli students do a lot of volunteering. One of the greatest programs is called Perach, where students devote part of the time, maybe a day a week or 2 days a week, depending on what sort of degree you're in. You know, in the humanities and social sciences, you may have more time available. But if they devote a day or 2 days a week to tutoring children from disadvantaged backgrounds, then they can get a lot of their tuition fees paid in return, which is a great sort of national welfare program, which basically benefits everybody all around. IDC is a private university, and therefore the fees there are much higher. Every university has a foreign students department, so you need to check the university websites. The Bagrut, or the high school, here is equivalent, let's say, to A-levels. But to get into a university in Israel, you have to have what's called a sekem, which is a combination of your final marks at high school, a combination with a psychometric that every Israeli has to take to get into university. There are the ability to do it in English, and there are similar sorts of tests which can be made in England. You have to check out what is an equivalent. And again, every Israeli university has a friend's office or a donor's office. In the UK, as in America, they're mostly concerned with raising funds, but they usually are able to help you with application techniques for that particular university. And increasingly, my university vice chancellor rector, who's also, by the way, an ex-Londoner, Professor Chaim Hames, told me this morning that our university, for instance, is setting up a mechina, a preparatory year for international students, for foreign students, to help them move their way from education elsewhere into a university education here. All Israeli universities have many dorms, normally used by first-year students. So most Israeli students who are that bit older prefer sharing apartments. It depends where. Obviously, Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, there's more life. Beersheba has a very good reputation as a place for student activities because it's that little bit more off the center of the map, and it depends where students choose to go. And some universities, thanks often to foreign donations, have completely separate dorms for international students. It depends whether people feel the desire to mix with Israeli students or not. That's a fairly open option. PhDs and postdocs are not that much different from what happens elsewhere around the world. You apply, you try and find a suitable place, a suitable supervisor. Sometimes there are grants available, sometimes you're funding yourself, and there are often advertisements. If you look on the academic pages, there are often advertisements about particular doctoral grants which are available and so on. Very quickly, to move to people who want to come and work as academics because they already have all the degrees, or perhaps they already have a junior lectureship post. People can always come on sabbaticals if they have colleagues here who are willing to invite them. Again, the funding depends. There are specific institutes like the Institute for Advanced Studies or Desert Studies. For tenure track positions, you need to check all the advertisements. And often a person coming to work as a lecturer or senior lecturer in Israeli university, Misrad HaKlita will often, not always, but will often fund the position for the first 3 to 5 years and try and ensure that university will provide an available position afterwards at the end of the funding. There are 4 levels for someone coming in. There's lecturer, senior lecturer, associate professor, and full professor. Outside the humanities, it's very rare for someone to come in at any level below that of senior lecturer. And people who come with a full professor status will also, and tenure from their home university at a more senior level, will also be given tenure straight away. At a more junior level, you usually have to wait a few years for tenure to be granted. You're expected, obviously, to teach, to research, to raise funds, but that's pretty much the same as happens in any British or North American university today. It's not an easy process. There aren't that many positions available. It's a highly competitive process. Every time we advertise a new position, we can end up with 30, 40, 50 applicants, many of them coming from outside Israel, people like yourselves who want to make Aliyah. So you have to have a good file. You need, the name of the game today is publish or perish. It's no different in Israel in that sense to any other place. Israel is high on the international rankings and it wants to stay there. So what I would say is that we have a very high quality academic environment, both for students and for people who want to work here. Good international exposure. Don't worry too much about everything you hear about BDS. There's a lot of headlines and hot air about it, but it has impacted Israeli universities and academic teaching in a very minimal way. And I can say that from personal experience, having worked with Israeli universities in combating BDS. For those of you coming as students, particularly undergraduates, don't forget that the average Israeli student is quite a bit older than you. He's been through 3 or 4 years of army, and particularly the students right now have been through and are still going through some very difficult situations in Gaza. So their mindset is not exactly the same as your mindset, and it may take time to really make connections with those students. You're always welcome to write to me on email if you want more information. Look at the university website, speak to the donor offices in your own country. And I'm also in and out of England. If there's anyone who particularly wants to meet me, they can ask Dov, and he'll try maybe to set up meetings when I'm in England. And I'm very eager to help all of you. And just to say one thing, by coming to Israel, of course, you don't have to miss out on the things you like from your home country. Before I got online with you today, through VPN, I was watching Match of the Day. Unfortunately, Everton got an equaliser at the very last moment. And right now, when I finish with you, I'm going to switch on a screen and watch the final hours of day play of India-England in a test match. We're in a global world. We've got great internet services here, and you don't really need to miss anything. Thank you.
David, thank you so much.